you're very interested in air conditioning and have been for years. As a 6-year-old, were you like super blown away by the technology?
Yeah, when I was 6, I said, What is this wind coming out the box there, mommy?"
This podcast contains the arguably witty banter of two friends, Skippy and Doogles, that like to debate about investing. The content is intended to be entertaining and for informational purposes only, not investment advice. You should do your own research and consult a financial professional before using any of the information in this podcast, and especially before investing.
When I bring up Michael J. Fox to you, what do you think about?
Ooh, very likable guy.
Really? Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, I
It really
mean,
is.
Back to the Future, great. But what did I watch recently? Like Doc Hollywood or something like that?
Oh,
Funnier
that's a
than I
good one too.
remembered. I mean,
That's a good one too.
yeah.
I enjoyed that one.
But you should know this won't come as a surprise to you that my family used to call me Alex P. Keaton growing up.
Okay, I don't even I won't unbundle that. That's for a conversation with your therapist. But I'll tell it so quickly on Doc Hollywood. I hadn't thought about Doc Hollywood in a while. So back in my day, my junior days, there was a female, a member of the female part of our species, who I was trying to court. And I, as a part of the conversation, I brought up Doc Hollywood. I was like, I watched this movie. It was real good. Doc Hollywood, you should check this out. Unbeknownst to me, this member of the female part of our species was very religious. And there's a scene in Doc Hollywood in which there's another member, a different member of the female species that is coming out of the ocean unclothed. And that violated so much of her like value system that it kicked me right to the curb before I even got started. I thought I was the king, became the jester.
Well, this is part of the Doc Hollywood discussion in my household too. I thought that was an appropriate movie for my middle school boy, and it was not. And we
Yep, there you go.
we had to switch gears.
I've actually realized there are no movies made before the year 2000 that are appropriate for anyone under
Pretty
the age of
much,
15 to watch.
pretty much. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
hilarious.
yeah. But anyway, you got me on a tangent about Doc Hollywood. That's not what we're talking about. It was because of Back to the Future. Because of Back to the Future. I'm going to take us back to the future right now. To start off, reach into that fishbowl, start off with this. This is a quiz for you. What was the title of the 7th episode of this here podcast?
No idea.
What? Before you go to bed, you don't study all the episode titles? Because
Aren't
they're
we
genius.
200 episodes in or something?
Not yet, but we're getting there.
Keep it
Move
moving.
on.
Yeah, keep
Move
it
on.
moving.
All right. The title of this, which you laughed at me. You went at the time. You laughed at me. The title is HVAC is the New Black. This came out February 15th, 2021. HVAC is the New Black, baby. Now you recall.
Yeah, deep breaths over here. I just have to interrupt. This is a week where nothing happened that should change your investing psyche, including the presidential debates. And Douglas, before we jump into talking about HVAC, which is great, I'm excited about it. That public service announcement needs to be said. I mean, there's nothing going on right now.
There's everything going on right now. There's everything always going on. I agree with you. Shouldn't change your investing psyche, but what week should? No week should.
Yeah, which is kind of my point.
However, there's always exciting stuff going on. And hide your cats, hide your dog, hide your husbands. Given the presidential debate this week. That's a whole separate thing. We don't need to talk about that. I want to talk about HVAC, and specifically, I want to talk about air conditioning. Now, back in the Deuce Zero, Deuce One, when I brought up HVAC as the New Black, and you laughed me out of house and home, is what you did.
Mm-hmm.
I had thrown down like a year before, something like that. I can't remember. Sometime before then, I throw down. It's a small percent of my portfolio. I think in total, probably something like 5 to 7%. I can't remember of my portfolio in HVAC, just off of the simple hypothesis. I mean, I read up, looked at financials and stuff, but the high level thesis is this: the world's getting hotter. I listened to what happened was I was listening to Nelly, and I was like, It is getting hot up in here. But I'll leave my clothes on. You're welcome. But I said the world's getting hotter, and there's so much pent up demand in the future. However, not a lot of supply right now and penetration across the globe. There's a piece that came out this week from Ben Carlson on the wealth of common sense, and it's called Air Conditioning and Economic Wonder. So he hits on a few facts. The thing I actually like most about Ben Carlson is the graphs that Ben has. Like, because I think they just have access to data and data sources, and they've got research that happens at the firm. And so he just ends up putting up these graphs. So I want to walk through a few of the points, if that's cool with you.
Yeah. I mean, I understand your high level hypothesis. But what does it all mean, Doogles? I mean, you're very interested in air conditioning and have been for years. As a 6-year-old, were you like super blown away by the technology? What's going on here? I want to unpeel the layers of the onion.
Yeah. When I was 6, I said, what is this wind coming out the box there, mommy? That's what I said. That's what I said. The thing is, no, it's a simple hypothesis. However, here's actually the quandary that I have before I even step into this. The quandary is, so I do believe that there's, and I don't think this is wild to believe, there's massive disruption that has to happen because of the lack of penetration that exists across the globe with regard to HVAC. The issue is, so what I did was I invested in the publicly traded organizations that I believed had solid financials that are in the space, but I brought the word disruption before, right? And the question is it likely that those are going to be the entities that end up getting the penetration, or will it be someone else? And that I don't know, but that's what I have access to. So I've kept an ear out in the private markets too, but that's my public market.
Yeah, right. But so, okay.
We still haven't gotten to the article here.
I know, but I'm trying to get there because I truly want to understand this for you. So 10% of Europe has AC, 90% of the United States has AC, pretty much. That's if we jump to the
and
facts.
that 10% in Europe was like 3% not too many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That shows you the growth. GROF.
Yeah. So do you know Ian Bremmer? He's like his latest book is called The Power of Crisis. We've talked about this before. I don't think you were able to read it, but
nope.
It's an interesting take. Like it's tilted on, if you believe that climate change is headed our way and you believe that will make catastrophic weather events more common, and you believe that some regions of the world will be significantly less hospitable, livable, whatever you call it, than they used to be, then basically the way nation states borders are currently drawn just doesn't really allow for that. It might mean the US is maybe the only country in the world that has this huge landmass with, and it's not the only country in the world, but one of the best positioned, huge landmass with different environments, with different elevations, with different watersheds, with all this flexibility to say, oh, you know what, New Orleans is not hospitable anymore, but those people can shift to Houston, as we've seen with different hurricanes and those sort of things. But Europe, Africa, the Middle East, there's all sorts of regions that don't have that same flexibility in terms of how people move. Is that that high level hypothesis, does that tie into your air conditioning hypothesis, or am I on a completely different soapbox here?
No, not at all. That's hogwash. you don't need to move because just buy HVAC. It doesn't work that way. In some cases, you might lose your shoreline, and you, I know
that home. I mean, this is currently happening in certain communities in California, even where homes are just, and North Carolina, where homes are just falling into the ocean. So it's more complex than you just add HVAC, right?
Oh, it's so much more complex than that. So one, I'm gonna drop this out there. One of the reasons, there are many, but one of the reasons why I love investing is because, and if you listen to this podcast, you can recognize this through what we talk about, is because so many factors come into it. It's not just about one viewpoint. It is partially about things like what you're talking about. It's looking at, like, if this happens and that happens and that might happen. I'm not saying that's going to drive a large investment or bet necessarily, but it's important to take into account the multitudes of factors for two things, I think. One is for decisions you might make, and two is for decisions you might not make. Meaning, there are there are times where I see something and I'm like, ooh, this looks like it could be a thing to invest in. But then because of all the complexities, I go, actually, I don't understand it well enough to really be diving into that. So that's why I love investing. So that's the first point.
Yeah.
Second thing I'm going to drop off here is that there are two books I'm going to recommend to Chal. Okay. Two books. One is fiction, one's nonfiction. Well, one's fiction, the other one's about the future. So I don't know if you call that fiction or nonfiction, but it's nonfiction about the future. So is that fiction? I don't know. But the fiction one is called Ministry for the Future. The premise of this book is that there is, in the not too distant future from now, there's a heat wave that strikes India. Over the course of 2 weeks, millions of people, or like tens of millions of people die. I can't remember the number. It's like a lot of people die over the course of 2 weeks. And it sparks this global, I don't know what else to call it, but like retreat / revolution / like so much happens in that time because some people from the climate change angle get real fanatical about it, like start taking down planes and whatnot. Worth reading, fiction book. Non-fiction book. The End of the World is Just the Beginning. I may have recommended that book on this podcast before, but this book is the premise of, I just thought about this because of what you brought up around the US and its resources. The basic premise of this is if you look at peace today, it's saying that peace today around the world is largely held together by the US Navy. We ensure that global trade is possible. And because of that global trade, you don't, as a country, have to have all the resources yourself. You can specialize in certain things and get the rest of the supply chain from somewhere else. If the US pulls back from that, what happens? That is the premise of the book.
Yeah.
You can disagree with the premise on its own, but it's an interesting take into looking at what resources different parts of the world actually have. I think that's the interesting part about it. So take a gander at those. We still haven't gotten to the air conditioning article, by the way.
Well, yeah, so get there, because to me, it's so much more complex than just about air conditioning. Phoenix, Arizona, this summer had 100 straight days where the high temperature was greater than 100 degrees, right? I think the interim solution to your hypothesis, Douglas, is like AC is great. AC makes less people die in that environment.
Yeah.
But I always want to jump to but what about 20 years from now? Or I don't know the time frame. I don't know if it's 100 years from now or 500 years from now. But I don't know that AC is always the solution. And I'm not suggesting you think that. But anyway, tell me.
Yeah. AC is obviously not the long-term solution, because also the AC that we know today isn't climate sustainable enough for it to be the ultimate. Like, it causes its own issues. It's like this because it depends on the air conditioning you get, but the majority of air conditioning that people end up buying causes more climate change issues or emits more carbon. Let me say that for those that may not believe fully in it, but that's not all the case. But anyway, we don't need to get into that. We don't need to get into that. All right. Let me just highlight some of the points in the article. Okay. Okay. Some of the points in the article. 1 point we already hit on: penetration across the world. If you look at India, the percent of homes that have air conditioning in India is 5%. India.
Mm-hmm.
What you talking about, Willis? India? Wild. You just mentioned Europe, 10%. I think like a decade ago when I was looking at Europe, it was like 3%. 10% is Europe. Indonesia, 9%. Brazil, 16%. Then you get to Japan, US, as you mentioned, 90%. Okay. So that's first point. Second point, air conditioning is a key driver of economic development. The ability for an organization. No, don't shake your head. Don't shake your head at me unless you're going to shake it up and down. Unless you're going to shake it up and down like a nod. You know what I'm saying? The reason that this point comes up is because what he's saying is that when you have an innovation like air conditioning, it allows certain geographies to be able to function. Like, it's a baseline. If I'm too hot, I'm not going to create the code. If I'm too hot, actually, you need the heat to be able to create the GPUs. But I was going to say, if I'm too hot, I can't create the GPUs, but you need the heat to create the GPUs. So it's a little different. Next, there's a productivity impact. I'll skip that one. Next, when you look at migration, you were talking about migration. When you look at migration, air conditioning can be a catalyst for migration. As climate change roars ahead, AC is likely going to influence migration. And as you mentioned, it's going to save lives. Well, that's what I'm doing, is saving lives through my investments. if you take just Europe alone, there's so much economic potential and in buying the air conditioning and what it has to then shape the economy as you go forward. Anyway, here's the point. Air conditioning is the center of the universe. That's the point.
Let's be a little less hyperbolic. I don't.
Is it possible? I mean, I thought I wasn't hyperbolic there. That's just like fact.
I don't. I'm not going to quibble with too many of your statements there. The only one that I think is potentially about to change is the fact that solar and battery power continue to make such incredible innovations and are like becoming exponentially more powerful that I can picture a world where a place like Europe or India, you can buy whatever a $5,000 unit that's like a complete hybrid with a battery, solar panels, and an AC system that you plop down on your property, and it effectively takes care of itself. I mean, I do think that the golden era of air conditioning is headed our way, and I do expect it to be maybe more important is the right way to say it. And that definitely impacts migration patterns because a place like Phoenix, Arizona, you basically can't live without air conditioning. I find it all interesting. I just think at the end of the day, there's so many more complexities here. And I know you're not pretending there isn't, but
it's just awesome. That's all I have to say. Back in, it was 2020. Yeah, 2020. United Technologies, very large organization, a very large conglomerate. They spun off Otis Elevator and Carrier Global. And I was like, oh, snap, because Carrier Global, air conditioning. Bought that ish up, hand over fist. It was actually like one part of a knuckle. It's really what I bought up, but still. But it's one of those that on a periodic basis, I just toss a bit more to, like without really not without thought fully, but kind of without thought, like add to it over time. It's one of those situations. All right. What you got in the fishbowl?
There's two things of interest to me at the moment.
Okay.
One, I'm hesitant to talk about because you get all fired up again. And this is something you've been talking about since episode 7. And that's that Americans are falling behind with their bills, especially lower income Americans. Credit card delinquencies are up. The CFO of Ally Financial is flashing warning signs. We might get to that. I think another is kind of a more interesting topic that might tie into Broadcom for you. But for me, like a month ago, I had this eye-opening analyst moment where I had kind of looked at Visa, and MasterCard stock is pretty similar. I'd kind of looked at those companies from afar before and always been like, my goodness, they're so expensive, because they are on all measures, like price to earnings, price to book is insane. Obviously there's no book value there, et cetera, but the amount of profits, it's really cash flows that they take home relative to their revenue. And this is why I mentioned Broadcom. I saw a metric this week that said Broadcom's free cash flow yield is something like 50%, Doogles. I bet you know the numbers better than I do because I haven't done a deep dive.
Yeah.
But I just think it's a fun point to talk through. Like in most cases, in 98% of cases, you want to look at multiple metrics because companies usually have a significant amount of expenses. But there are these super asset light software based companies usually where and I think you may want to talk about OnlyFans later in the episode, where so much of the actual revenue in the door flows downstream and ends up as free cash flow. And ultimately, that's what really matters.
And that's what those companies you just mentioned, that is all they are. It's fast. If I think about two different businesses. So if one day someone said, just imagine, what if everything that people bought in the world, like all consumerism, came through you? You go, oh, that's silly. But just what if you get Amazon? Then I'm not saying it's all, but you get like, just take it to the extreme. And then somebody else was like, this happened before that, but I'm going to just spin the narrative here. Someone else is like, okay, I see you. Everyone buys that. What if everything everyone bought in the world you just got a piece of without having to carry inventory or anything. Oh, that's a more interesting business. I'll bring up Broadcom for a different reason. This is speculation, but I think it'd be interesting. So you brought it up
Do you
because of
mean
free cash flow.
speculation? Just so I'm clear,
I
in
said
case we have any
what I said.
3-year-olds.
I said what
We
I
have any-
said, and I mean what I said. Speculation. Yes, I meant speculation. But
Okay.
this is looking into the future. So you brought up because of free cash flow, and that is Broadcom is a cash flow monster, which is why it grows
Yeah.
the way it does and it pays a dividend. But the thing I want to mention is where Broadcom is trying to position itself, and if it works, it'll be solid. Is that right now? This is AI people. I'm sorry. Right now in the AI craze, what people are doing is buying the stuff to make the AIs. That is the most simplistic, inaccurate, but you don't need to go deeper than that. They're buying like the GPUs from NVIDIA, etc., to make AI happen. What Broadcom owns is how data centers, chips, etc., talk to each other. It has the network switching. So what they're saying is, okay, yeah, after you buy all the stuff and you can do all the CapEx and you have all the AI, etc., somehow those data centers need to continue connecting in the intensive way that they do with AI. And that is what Broadcom is trying to own. Cash flow, baby. Cash
Yeah.
rules everything around me. Trademark that. That's a real good saying right there. No, but anyway, yeah, Visa, going back to Visa and MasterCard, it's like they're brilliant businesses. And it's hard because they are super expensive. And I feel like they always will be. I don't know, because they just are what they are. They're just cash generating machines. They will either be broken up or just will be expensive stocks forever.
So I want to be crystal clear. I'm not recommending Visa. I don't think it's cheap, and we don't recommend stocks on the show. We give research recommendations. It's a fun one to look at because I think both those business models, whether it's Broadcom or Visa, for someone like me whose investing foundation is based on Benjamin Graham's teachings, like Benjamin Graham couldn't even imagine businesses like this. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think you're right.
If you're writing post Great Depression and you're like, someday there will be effectively technology companies that can scale with minimal costs and can put as much as 50% of revenues like directly to free cash flow.
Wild.
It's insane. Visa has then in the past decade or so basically taken their common shares outstanding and reduced it by 40%. So they're buying back so much equity that's supercharging what happens to like revenue per share and everything else.
Yep.
And it is expensive. If I ever made a big bet on Visa, I'd want it to happen in a place like 1999 or 2009, where the worldwide economy pulls back significantly and you say this infrastructure is so good. I want to continue to talk about like just Visa, MasterCard for a second, because I think there's a really interesting hypothesis there. I think they might be such good businesses that they will print money for an extended period of time and then they will almost go to zero. Because in order to replace this infrastructure, like here's some crazy ideas. It could be something like crypto. It could be something like the federal government's real-time payment network, which is actually pretty impressive, and we can talk about that. I'm now using that on a weekly basis and kind of blown away that the federal government did something that's that cool. It could be something else, but it's like they will be dominant players maybe for the next 100 years or maybe not. But I see the risk not as like there's almost no immediate risk 6 months from now, 12 months from now. But they could be such good businesses that people will slowly create networks that can replace them. And that's like a 20-year run. It's like replacing IBM or others.
When an organization makes that much money, one of two things happens. They either someone comes to take the money is the one thing that happens, but it happens in one of two ways. Always. One is that you're mentioning is competition. Like they get eroded away over time. The second is government. One of those two things. Someone's going to take the money. And when I say government, I mean regulation. But when there's too much money being made, someone takes it away. The the magic, I experienced the magic, I think for the first time, of the Fed now ish through Wealthfront. I can only imagine that that's what they're using on that side. It was the first. So thank you for pointing me to Wealthfront, by the way.
Yeah.
So I was transferring money from my Wealthfront account to my checking account, and it was the first time that I went in. I was like, I need the funds to hit in 4 days, so like let me pull now, just so there's some safety. I go to pull the money out of Wealthfront, and it was like the money will be in your account by 9 p.m. tonight, and I went, excuse, like, do I need to call customer service? Like, do I need to check in on this? Because what? And it's the way it should work. It's just I have been so trained that that's not possible.
It's better than that. I don't know if you, I mean, a lot of banks now, including like my Podunk credit union that I use for some things, will use FedNow, and it's instantaneous. It's seconds with no fees, no anything. It's mind blowing.
Wow.
Almost.
Wow.
Back to Visa for a second. Two stats.
Yeah.
Visa is the largest payment processor in the world. There's network effects associated with that. In 2023, they processed almost 15 trillion of total volume, operates in 200 countries and over 160 currencies, can do 65,000 transactions per second, basically twice the size in terms of their network of MasterCard, which is the next largest payment processor in the world. It's truly, absolutely amazing. The Facebook of its space, but it may be too good to be true. It may be too dominant. And that's, I think, where you're talking about governments potentially get involved or other things happening. Because I don't think you can travel. I could be wrong. Maybe someone can prove me wrong. But I don't think you can travel the world without Visa.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible.
It's why my bet. And no, sorry, bet's actually too strong because I'm not doing anything with this. My for funsies guess. That's all it is. My for funsies guess, going back to when we discussed what Warren Buffett will do with Berkshire Hathaway's money. My for funsies guess is this. If the cash gets deployed while Warren is alive, you're talking more something like on the extreme end, like a Starbucks, and more likely something like Target or 3M. If the cash gets deployed after Warren passes, which I hope never happens, but Warren passes, I think there could be a significant chunk of Visa. I don't think Warren would pull the trigger on that, but I could see a significant chunk of Visa getting bought up over time.
Well, so I think Warren has 300 billion because he's hedging. He's never rooting for bad things to happen, but he's hedging that something might blow up and there might be some opportunities to pick up deals. But if he's just like forced to spend it, and that's not how he works. So this is a bad example. If someone else was sitting on 300 billion with his portfolio of companies, we talked about this this month, right? He wants basically the largest of every thing in the US, whether that's an insurer or a railroad company or an oil company or whatever. He's just trying to buy the key infrastructure for the US and world economy. In the payments world, Visa's about as key as it gets, man. Like it'd be a great thing to add to the portfolio.
And it's cash
at the right price.
Right? I mean, the reason that he owns so much insurance and has someone that only runs insurance is because it is a cash generating machine. It has all that float that you can then use for other purposes, including gaining interest when that's the thing to get. When something spits off cash like this, whew, I tell you what. All right. Can I transition us? Or do you have more to talk about? Okay. Transition us. Reaching that fishbowl again. There was a Reddit. I saved this for this week. This actually we consumed last week. I didn't put it on the Substack because I wanted to talk about it. There was a Reddit post called Buy, Borrow, Die Explained that I think
Doogles, I forgot about this. This was the only thing I wanted to talk about last week.
Yeah, but we collected all of our aggregated all our listener mail to talk about last week, so we didn't hit on it.
It's true, but this is amazing. I love this.
Okay, I'm gonna back up because I've never seen someone so enthusiastic about the words buy, borrow, and die before. Should I cede the floor to you?
No, give us the overview. I'm pulling it up actually over here.
Okay. Here, I'm gonna just hit on what buy, borrow, and die mean in this here situation. And then we can talk about implications, complications, situations, proclamations. Here's what they mean. So you, an individual, let's call this individual Skippy. Skippy buys an asset, things like real estate, stock, something that appreciates in value over time. But Skippy says, I'm not going to sell the asset because if I sell it after the value has been appreciated, there's going to be a taxable event. I'm going to owe some money. So instead of selling it, I'm going to borrow against it. Now we're to borrow. So this asset, this piece of real estate is an example. It's appreciated in value. I borrow against it. So Skippy now gets a loan or line of credit, whatever it might be, using this asset as collateral. And then you can borrow that money and start using it for personal expenses. This has come up a few times in the pod. Borrow that money. I'm going to go to Neiman Marcus. Borrow that money. I'm going to go to Cinnabon. Whatever you want to do, you can go spend that money. No income tax.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, as with all people, Skippy passes away. These assets, maybe I shouldn't have used you because now it becomes sad. And I don't like
It's
that.
all good. It's all good.
All right. And you pass on this asset to your heirs. So now what happens is while Skippy was alive, the cost basis of the asset was, let's call it $100. Once Skippy passes away, the cost basis of that asset adjusts to whatever the fair market value is at the time when Skippy passes away. So let's say it's now $1,000. So now instead of $100 being the tax basis, the cost basis, I mean, $1,000.
Yeah, hold on. Could I jump in? We're going to use real numbers, and we are going to.
How are we going to use real numbers?
From this example, and I'm actually going to. The reason this is important is because everyone's crazy about unrealized capital gains, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But VP Harris and team, I know some really good PR firms, and I'm happy to put you in touch with this. What this post illustrates for me, Doogles, is the true intent of what they are trying to accomplish and how it's very reasonable. And then the branding of this, if you're worth more than $100 million, we want to tax you on unrealized gains, is the worst possible way to say this, and also just flat out wrong. So the only reason that's being discussed, I'm going to use real numbers from the examples. In this example, they use a person called Peter, right?
Okay. All right. Let's get away from Skippy. Sounds great.
So double check these values as I walk through them, but I believe it goes like this. Peter comes into some money, maybe he sells a company or something. He buys an asset for $50 million. Okay.
Yep.
And he happens to do that in a low interest rate environment in a hot market, and 10 years later, all of a sudden, the fair market value of that asset is over $100 million, right?
Ooh, there you go, Peter. Get you some.
So he's doing great. The rational thing for Peter to do, he's now worth $100 million effectively, might be sell this asset, take his family to go live on the beach, and call it a day. But in this country, we reward smart, hardworking people better than anywhere else on earth. And some lawyers and some financial gurus get together and go, Peter, my man, for a small fee of only $500,000 a year, here's what I can do for you. We can take the asset value of your $100 million property. We can take out loans against it. We can structure those loans in very creative ways where you have low interest rates because the cost basis is covered. And basically, you don't have to really worry about those loans until you die. And then when you die, there's a step-up basis calculation that pays off those loans and transitions the value of that property, which, say you hold it for another 10 years, might be worth significantly more than 100 million. In the example here, they say 35 years pass, and at an annual rate of return of 8%, the fair market value of that asset is now $740 million.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so get this. So Peter, instead of doing the thing that would have been done in 1920, which is like, hey, I made a really nice investment. I'll just sell this, pay my taxes, and move forward. He jumps through some hoops with people who are more than willing to accommodate that, and as they should, because good for them. And he effectively never pays taxes on that. He actually gets a tax benefit because the interest on his loans he takes for that asset, that debt gives him a tax advantage. He lives his life never having to worry about money. And when he dies 35 years later, his heirs get an asset that is worth almost $250 million, and no one ever pays tax because of the step up basis that happens on his death. So, all very clever. As a capitalist, I love every aspect of this. As someone who peels back the covers and says, someone with a Buffett mindset about taxes, says, guys, I don't know, you invested 50 million, all of a sudden it's worth almost $1 billion and you never paid any taxes on it. Actually, you got a tax benefit because of the way you play these games. Seems like our tax code has a loophole here that should probably get fixed. Now, smart people like Mark Cuban, Bill Ackman, et cetera, have all weighed in on ways to structure this appropriately. But this is all that's happening. Whenever you talk about, and sorry for being so long-winded here, Douglas, whenever someone talks about taxes on unrealized capital gains, they're just trying to say, hey, maybe we should make it so someone doesn't take 50 million, turn it into almost $1 billion and dodge taxes, actually get tax benefits the whole way home for 40 years. Seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, I think so too. I was having this debate actually a couple weeks ago with a couple folks that were very adamant about the fact that unrealized capital gains is the way to go. Tax the crap out of them issues. And and there's so much complexity to this that I'm also avoiding the complexity. But part of my thing, which relates to this, was in the case that someone is using the unrealized gain somehow as income, like effectively as income somehow, then I was like, I'm actually okay with taxing that. And again, that's avoiding because there's a lot of complexity in it. But if you're just allowing an asset to grow over time, then like, no, because it has the impact that it then has on both psychologically and practically on people's ability to compound, which is the beauty of all of this in the country. It takes away innovation. Basically, like
completely,
right. And so, but if you're borrowing against it to buy your yacht, and go, oh, okay, now you're actually bringing that money into the economy. That's a whole different beast. I actually sometimes want to go one step further. We don't need to here, but maybe someday I'd like to talk to you about this. Because to me, if I sell a stock and the money stays in my brokerage account to buy another stock, even in that case, it's kind of like what happens in an IRA. In my views, I'm like, I'm still not bringing that. Like, I'm not actually using the money for my everyday. I feel like if it's in the brokerage account, there's an argument to be made that it also should not be taxed. But
I can live with that argument, especially because if you had a personal ETF, which you simply wouldn't have because of the regulatory costs associated with it, but it would be treated that way. It's just like exchanged for your next investment. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Where that probably gets tricky is then when your balances reach tens to hundreds of millions, when you actually live on like instead of taking the dividends off that and actually being taxed on that and spending it, you take out a loan.
Yes, that's the issue.
It's structured in this really bizarre way that where the bank makes money, you maybe lose a little money, but the interest rate is really solid because it's backed by a solid asset. And then you just prolong everything until you die. It's just not the intent of the rule.
Yeah,
anyway, this is a write-up from a private tax attorney. I thought it's really good. One of the more succinct write-ups on buy, borrow, die I've read, and I enjoyed it. I appreciate you sending it my way, Douglas.
You know what I just thought about? Boyz II Men, ABC, BBD. Were they talking about buy, borrow, die, and not Bell Biv DeVoe?
No, based on like the local truck stops that they do their touring at these days, I don't think they're independently wealthy.
All right, fair enough. That is fair enough. You got anything else? I got one more thing to cover.
No, that's it.
It's what you already previewed. OnlyFans makes so much money. Oh my goodness. So much money. So I don't really know fully what OnlyFans is. I only know one view of OnlyFans at the high level. And so like I don't know if it's a broader thing. But what I believe, the way I would probably describe it from what I know, is that it's kind of like if you take like a Patreon, which is a service where you're a content creator and you can have someone subscribe and try and fund your innovation. I think OnlyFans is a different version of that same concept, except I don't know if it's exclusively, but it seems like it's predominantly around sex work or the like.
Important question here. I'm also a novice. Is there any investing podcasts on? Because we could use some of this money, Douglas.
Is there what?
Is there an investing podcast section
of OnlyFans? I don't know. We can look. So that's the general concept. The amount of money, that's what I want to talk about. So first, let me actually back up. So we brought up Matthew Ball when we discussed, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, we discussed Roblox. Matthew Ball wrote up a piece about Roblox financials. Apparently, that's just a thing Matthew Ball does, because now Matthew Ball wrote up a piece on OnlyFans economics. So thank you, Matthew, for feeding into my economic queries. When I talk about money, this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to give you all some numbers. Back in 2019, 2019, OnlyFans had $300 million in revenue. That's a solid business. Be like, oh, good, OnlyFans. But in 2023, this is gross revenue. In 2023, that number jumped to $6.6 billion. We're talking about a 20x increase in revenue over the course of 4 years. That is wild. Now, this revenue, he breaks out into 2 different components. One is subscription or recurring revenue, and one is one-off transaction revenue. And it's split about 40-60. So 40% subscription, 60% is one-off, which is also fascinating. I think what that shows, like if I were to interpret that as an investor, I would say that 40% feels, as long as you're not having too much churn, more baked, and you'd want to really value the business predominantly off the 40%. But that 60% one-off shows a level of engagement that's quite interesting. And the one-off revenue is really what's growing like super quickly. I don't know what the one-off revenue is for exactly, but that's what's growing super quickly. Second, what interested me is how much money they pay to creators. It's like 80%. So much money ends up going to the creators. So you can see why, at least from this, as a creator, if you're looking to make buku wuku from your services, this is quite a platform to go to. I don't think that that's probably sustainable over a long period of time.
Hold on. I don't have anything intelligent to say. I'm pretty much going to steer clear of this one. But speaking of Matthew Ball, we talked about Roblox last week and how it's by far the most popular gaming platform in the world and how they lose money hand over fist. They also have creators to pay. This, from that lens and only that lens, is kind of similar, and they make tons of money. So just the comparison there of like, you have people creating content and you're just the portal for folks to get that content. Their model seems to make a lot more sense.
And it seems like to me a part of the difference is, and I don't know what the cap table exactly looks like on OnlyFans, but I think part of the difference is OnlyFans isn't trying to be a large public company. It probably actually couldn't be. OnlyFans is just trying to generate a butt ton of money. and that butt ton could have been a lot smaller than 6 billion, and they would still be okay with that. From what I've seen, I think that, and I'm not getting this from the piece. I can't remember if this is in the piece or not, but I'm not taking this from the piece. It's like a headline I saw sometime this year. It was something like the owner of OnlyFans like owns most, or at least a very significant chunk of the organization. And so it's not one where you have a lot of investors that are saying like, go, 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 you have to get as big as possible. And so you have
that's in the piece somewhere.
It is.
The main owner, I forget his name, but he purchased 75% of the company in like 2008. I mean,
yeah, So they have 42 employees.
Which is super misleading because I have hundreds of contractors. But the revenue per employee figure is insane.
Yeah.
It like doesn't pencil. You go back to the Ben Graham comments earlier. It's like, wait, you can make $30 million per employee. Like, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
It's all mind-boggling. It makes
that's the difference to me. When you go to Roblox, the difference is because we talked about the platform fees Roblox has to pay, and OnlyFans is like, no, we're just gonna be OnlyFans. Like, I own this whole thing. I don't need it to be something massive to split amongst a whole lot of investors. Like, it's gonna be whatever it is. And if it's 6 billion this year and it's 2 billion next year, okay, that's still 2 billion. Like, I'm good. I'm okay with that number. I think that is a key difference. And you can attract creators, you could pay them a whole bunch of money. And so long as there isn't an insane amount of greed that comes for someone wants to make sure, go public, whatever it might be, I think you can just take your few $100 million a year and be okay with that.
Yeah. Bizarre. Like I said, nothing intelligent to say here. The write-up is interesting if people want to dive in.
Yeah. We'll share it on the Substack, skippydoogles.substack.com to check that out. Wow. Money, money, money.
All right. Hit us up at skippydoogles.com for all things related to the show. Listener mail is skippydoogles@gmail.com. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.